Module 6, Section 1, Types of Brain Functions, Part 1. In this module, we will discuss the correlation between enneatypes and brain functions. First of all, we will discuss the connection between the brain and the body. The right side of the body represents yang, and the left side of the body represents yin. Then, the right side of the body is connected to the left side of the brain, and the left side of the body is connected to the right side of the brain. Because of this crossing structure, when the zeptoform is used to represent a brain, left and right are reversed. For example, point 4 and point 5 are located in the right brain area. The right brain is intuitive, and type 4 and type 5 are intuitive types, as discussed in the previous module.
Note 1.
A yin channel, which is called eta, is located on the left side of the body. On the other hand, a yang channel, which is called pingala, is located on the right side of the body. Also, according to some Sufi teachings, the red essence, which represents a yang quality, tends to be experienced on the right side of the body.
Note 2.
In terms of yin and yang, the reversal of right and left can also be seen at the heart area. The right heart, which is the spiritual heart, is connected to the left side of the body. On the other hand, the left heart, which is the physical heart, is connected to the right side of the body. According to Ramana Maharishi and some other spiritual teachers, the spiritual heart is located on the right side of the chest.
Creativity and negativity of the right brain.
An artistic type, with her highly activated right brain, tends to suffer from mood disorders. According to research by K. Redfield Jameson, people with mood disorders account for approximately 5% of the population. In the case of artists and writers, it reaches approximately 30%. Furthermore, in the case of poets, this figure rises to about 50%, because poets are usually more right brain oriented than other writers. The language centers are located in the left brain. But, sensitive people like poets, especially women, have extended language centers in their right brains. Therefore, when they create works of art, using a language, their negatively oriented right brains tend to be activated. This tendency is most commonly seen in type 4. As already discussed, type 4 is a right brain type. As already discussed, when the zeptoform is used to represent the structure of a brain, the right side and the left side are reversed, as illustrated. But, in this section, we are using a mirror image. That is, the left side represents the left brain, and the right side represents the right brain.
Defense mechanisms.
As illustrated in this figure, type 7, type 3, and type 2 belong to the left brain types. The left brain tends to cause defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are unconscious strategies to deal with inconvenient facts. They are used to avoid negative things, in order to maintain positivity. According to some scientific research, this tendency is strongly related to the characteristics of extroverts. As we already know, type 7, type 3, and type 2 are extroverts. There are many different types of defense mechanisms. We will discuss 3 of them.
Denial. Refusal to accept inconvenient facts.
Type 7 has a tendency to be attached to pleasurable experiences, and tends to deny any negative experience. Type 2 has a tendency to be attached to an angel-like self-image, and tends to deny any beast-like self-image. Riso and Hudson said,
The essence of the problem of type 2 is that even average 2s have difficulty seeing themselves as they really are. They must see themselves only in positive terms. 2s deny that they have any hostile feelings whatsoever, concealing their aggressions not only from others, but also from themselves. Their self-image prohibits them from being openly hostile. They therefore deny to themselves, and to others, that they have any selfish or aggressive motives whatsoever.
Type 3 has a tendency to be attached to a successful or sophisticated self-image, and any counter self-image, which is related to social failure, tends to be denied.
Pathological lying.
Pathological lying is the tendency to make up stories, in order to maintain self-esteem and or comfort. Type 7 has a tendency to make up stories, in order to have enjoyable life situations. Type 2 has a tendency to make up stories, in order to create an altruistic self-image. According to Riso and Hudson, both type 7 and type 2 have a tendency to have histrionic personality disorder, and one of the main characteristics of this disorder is pathological lying. Type 3 has a tendency to make up stories, in order to create a successful and sophisticated self-image.
Reaction formation.
Reaction formation is the tendency to deny an unwanted real intention by expressing its opposite self-image, often in an exaggerated way. For example, type 2 does not want to be seen as needy. Therefore, she tends to express its opposite intention in an exaggerated way. According to Gilbert Becker, extroverts tend to experience denial, repression, and reaction formation. These are the tendencies, not to face inconvenient facts. On the other hand, introverts tend to experience rumination. That is the process of continuously thinking about the same thoughts, which tend to be sad or dark. As we can see, the defense mechanisms, which are related to the denial of the dark side, tend to be experienced by extroverts. This figure was discussed in the previous module. As indicated in this figure, type 1 is not strongly extroverted, compared with other extroverted types. Related to this, type 1 does not tend to deny negative aspects of reality. Point 8 represents the brainstem type, or the instinctive type. Because of this, 8s tend to be cautious about negative aspects of reality, for their own survival.
Integration of shadows.
As already discussed, type 7, type 2, and type 3 are positive types, and they tend to deny negative aspects of reality. In order to face negativity, or shadows, they need to experience the process from 7 to 5, from 2 to 4, and from 3 to 6. The process from 7 to 5, and from 2 to 4, are deepening processes. Also, the process from 3 to 6 brings about the process of deepening, as we have seen in Module 2. These processes are needed to acquire the insight of introverts, in order to integrate shadows, or negativity, which have been denied by defense mechanisms. Type 6, which is the ambivert, is located in the corpus callosum area, which is the connection between the left brain and the right brain. A person with a thick corpus callosum tends to experience the conflict between the left brain and the right brain. In the process from type 3 to type 6, type 3 needs to overcome this conflict, as we have seen in Module 2. As discussed in Module 2, the process from point 3 to point 6 is experienced as the process from point 3 to point 1, to point 2, to point 4, and to point 6. As we can see, this process includes a deepening process. The right brain brings about the insight to recognize defense mechanisms. Therefore, when the right brain is damaged, defense mechanisms tend to be amplified. This tendency has been described by many authors, such as Oliver Sacks and Ramachandran.
Analytical and integral.
The left brain is analytical, focusing on details. On the other hand, the right brain is integrative, focusing on the whole. The right brain takes in the analytical information from the left brain, and it integrates details to see the whole picture. Type 5, which corresponds to the thinking center of the right brain, is good at both analytical thinking as well as integrative thinking. The holy idea of type 5 is holy omniscience. From the perspective of holy omniscience, the essential functions of analysis as well as integration tend to arise. This essential aspect is called the diamond guidance. Almas said,
In its functioning, the diamond guidance uses two primary faculties, two operations, in an organically combined way, analysis and synthesis. It combines the functioning of the right and left hemispheres of the brain, in a unified action of understanding.
Type 4, which corresponds to the emotion center of the right brain, is good at both analytical and integrative skills, in terms of aesthetic qualities. The holy idea of type 4 is holy origin. From the perspective of holy origin, the essential functions of self-realization tend to arise. This essential aspect is called the essential self, which is also called the point. It is experienced as a point of light. Then, multiple points of light in your timeline are connected to form the thread. When this process is facilitated by the function of the diamond guidance of type 5, it is experienced as the process from the point diamond to the thread diamond. In terms of willpower and action power, or decision-making and execution, the function of the left brain dominates the right brain. But, the right brain can see the whole picture, and that is the insight to integrate willpower and action power. In this section, we discussed the difference between the right brain and the left brain. Then, in the next section, we will discuss the difference between the top brain and the bottom brain. Module 6, Section 2, Types of Brain Functions, Part 2.
The visual perception, of the brain.
Visual information is perceived by the visual cortex, which is located in the occipital lobe. Then, this information is sent to the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe. The former recognizes the visual information of space, and the latter recognizes that of objects. In other words, the former recognizes where, and the latter recognizes what. According to the theory of cognitive modes, the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe are categorized as the top brain, and the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe are categorized as the bottom brain. This theory also states the following. The top brain is related to spatial visualization, and the bottom brain is related to object visualization. The former focuses on where, which includes location, direction, distance, etc. The latter focuses on what, which includes shape, texture, color, etc. Scientists tend to be the top brain type, and artists tend to be the bottom brain type. Stephen Koslin and Wayne Miller state the following.
The scientists performed the top brain, spatial task, better than the artists, but the artists performed the bottom brain, grain resolution task, better than the scientists. Visual artists scored higher on object imagery than did scientists or humanists, whereas scientists scored higher on spatial imagery than did artists or humanists.
As described, scientists tend to be the top brain type, and artists tend to be the bottom brain type. These two types are represented by point 5 and point 4, respectively, as illustrated.
Note:
in this figure, we are using a mirror image. That is, the left side represents the left brain, and the right side represents the right brain. Spatial visualization, which is related to the parietal lobe of the right brain, is required for geometrical perception, such as geometrical recognition of spacetime. Therefore, there are many scientists who have a highly developed parietal lobe of the right brain. Einstein was one of them. This was confirmed by the autopsy of his brain. Point 5 is located in this area, as illustrated. Related to this, Einstein is considered to be type 5 by many Enneagram specialists. Object visualization, which is related to the temporal lobe, is required for artistic perception, such as painting and sculpting. Therefore, there are many artists who have highly developed temporal lobes. This function is related to the characteristic of type 4, as illustrated. This means that, although the top brain and the bottom brain are both categorized into the thinking center of a brain, the bottom part is intrinsically related to the function of feeling types. This figure was discussed in the previous module. As we can see, point 4, which represents object visualization, is the mixture of visual and kinesthetic. That is, object visualization is more kinesthetic than spatial visualization. For example, when artists are visualizing the texture of an object, they tend to feel the quality of the texture. This is a kinesthetic experience of the texture.
The right eyeside, and the left eyeside.
As illustrated in this figure, the left brain perceives the right visual field, and the right brain perceives the left visual field. People with severe right brain damage, for example, cannot perceive the left visual field. Also, they tend to behave as if the left side of the world does not exist. This is called hemispatial neglect. In contrast, people with severe left brain damage rarely exhibit this kind of neglect. They might not be able to see the right visual field physically, but they do not neglect it mentally. There are three main reasons for this difference.
Reason 1.
Defense mechanisms, such as denial and pathological lying, are mainly caused by the left brain, not by the right brain.
Reason 2.
The left brain processes information from the right spatial field only. On the other hand, the right brain processes information from both the left and right. That is, the left visual field might be lost, but the right brain does not neglect the existence of the left spatial field.
Reason 3.
Spatial perception is mainly processed by the right brain. That is, as already discussed in this section, the right top brain has the function to perceive the spatial field.
Note 1.
According to Dr. Richard Davidson, when people are thinking about negative things, they tend to look to the left, indicating the activation of the right brain, which is the negative brain. As we can see, the left visual field and the right brain are connected.
Note 2.
When people are lying, denying the fact, they tend to look to the upper right. It indicates the activation of the left brain. On the other hand, when people are recalling a fact, they tend to look to the upper left. It indicates the activation of the right brain. As we can see, the left brain tends to deny the fact in order to deny negative things. On the other hand, the right brain tends to face the fact, facing negativity. In this section and the previous section, we have discussed the functions of the right brain, the left brain, and the brainstem. Also, we discussed the functions of the top brain and the bottom brain. In the next section, we will discuss types of gender. Then, in the following section, we will discuss the functions of the brain with regard to gender. Module 6, Section 3, Types of Gender, Part 1. The three layers of the zeptoform represent the qualities of meaning, feminine, and masculine, as illustrated. Meaning qualities are intellectuality, logicality, rationality, systemic thinking, etc. Feminine qualities are sensitivity, sensibility, geniality, sympathy, empathy, etc. Masculine qualities are vitality, physicality, wildness, strength, kinesthetic, etc. In general, the male quality is considered to be the masculine quality. But, this designation is not accurate. For example, type 5 represents one type of male quality, but this male quality is not the masculine quality. The male quality of type 5 is intellectuality, logicality, rationality, or systemic thinking. In the zeptoform theory, it is called meaning. As discussed in the previous module, type 5 tends to be INTJ or INTP. With that said, according to MBTI manual, about 8.1% of men are these types. On the other hand, in the case of women, only 2.6% are these types. The masculine quality represents vitality, physicality, wildness, strength, and kinesthetic. Type 8 tends to have this quality. It represents primordial nature, which is the state before the sexual duality of male-female manifests. That is, the masculine quality is the fundamental base of both the male nature and the female nature. The beast is neither male nor female. But, the beast tends to be seen as a male, for several reasons. For example, the process from point A to point 5 brings about the unhealthy combination between the masculine quality and the meaning quality. In this process, the masculine quality is used to dominate others, including feminine qualities, and that is related to androcentrism. Napoleon, for example, is considered to be type 8. This tendency causes the negative affiliation between the masculine quality and the male quality. The functioning mode of type 3 represents the pragmatic male quality, and it includes both the meaning quality and masculine quality. But, this pragmatic mode dissociates from the feminine quality. Related to this, the male quality tends to be equated with the masculine quality. For example, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone are type 3. Type 1, which represents a paternal male quality, is one type of the meaning quality. He tends to suppress some aspects of the beast-like masculine quality. But, unlike type 5 and type 9, he does not dissociate from the beast. Type 1 has a tendency to fight against the beast within. That is, the superego of type 1 has a tendency to fight against the id of himself. In other words, type 1 has the tendency to use the strength of the beast in order to fight against the beast. Therefore, type 1 tends to exhibit the qualities of both the meaning quality and the masculine quality. The authoritative paternal figure of point 1 is intrinsically connected to the masculine quality. As discussed in the previous module, type 1 tends to be ESTJ or ISTJ. With that said, according to MBTI manual, about 28% of men are these types. On the other hand, in the case of women, only 13% are these types. Type 9, Type 2, and Type 4 represent feminine qualities. The feminine quality of Type 2 is intrinsically connected to the masculine quality of Type 8. But, Type 2 has a tendency to deny the masculine quality of herself, covering up the beast within. She tends to use the masculine quality unconsciously. This is one of the reasons as to why the masculine quality tends not to be equated with the female quality. As discussed in the previous module, Type 2 tends to be ESFJ. With that said, according to MBTI manual, about 17% of women are ESFJ. On the other hand, in the case of men, only 7.5% are ESFJ. The process from point 2 to point 8 can be seen in the following way. Estrogen, which is the feminine quality, is represented by point 2. Then, in the process from point 2 to point 8, it is connected to testosterone, which is the masculine quality. In general, estrogen decreases aggression, as well as anxiety. But, when it is working with testosterone, it promotes maternal aggression. In this process, type 2 tends to use the masculine quality in a destructive way. Also, she tends to deny it, as we have already discussed. The process from point A to point 2 can be seen in the following way. Testosterone, which represents the masculine quality, can be converted to estrogen, which represents the feminine quality. And this process cannot be reversed. That is, estrogen cannot be converted to testosterone. Because of this, the masculine quality can be seen as the most foundational quality of all qualities. The process from point 8 to point 5 was discussed previously. In terms of brain science, the process from point 8 to point 5 can be seen in the following way. Testosterone, which represents the masculine quality of type 8, can be used for the masculinization of the brain. However, in the Zeptoform theory, it is called mininization, not masculinization. Masculinization is the enhancement of type 8 qualities, but mininization is the enhancement of type 5 qualities. The mininization of the brain will be discussed in the next section. According to Claudio Naranjo, in type 2 and type 4, statistically, there are more women than men. The same can be said for type 9. But, in some contexts, type 9 represents the neutrality of gender. It is related to the ideology of transgender rights, which will be discussed in the next module. Type 6 is mainly connected to the paternal value system of point 1, representing one type of minin quality. But, the quality of type 6 tends to shift from one state to another, rapidly and frequently. In some situations, type 6 is strongly connected to the sensitivity of feminine quality. At the same time, the aggressiveness of the masculine quality is activated. This is the tendency of counterphobic type 6. In the previous section, we discussed the functions of the top brain and the bottom brain. Then, in the next section, we will use this categorization in order to analyze the qualities of minin and feminine.
Note:
in this context, the bottom brain includes the emotion center of a brain, which is the limbic system. Module 6, Section 4, Types of Gender, Part 2. In Section 1 and Section 2, we discussed the functions of the brain. Then, in Section 3, we discussed types of gender. In this section, we will integrate these aspects:
spatial and linguistic.
Point 5, in the top right brain area, represents spatial competence. On the other hand, point 2 in the bottom left brain area, represents linguistic competence. Spatial competence is related to the right parietal lobe. Men are superior in this respect, which accounts for the biggest statistical difference between men and women. The main reason for this difference is as follows. In early life, the development of men's left brain is restrained temporarily by androgens, which are male hormones. Then, in order to compensate for this underdevelopment of the left brain, the development of the right brain is enhanced. Related to this tendency, savant syndrome, autism, and left-handedness are more often seen in males than in females. These are related to the inferiority of the left brain and the superiority of the right brain. Many savants, who are good at picturing sceneries and reading maps, have highly developed spatial competence, and men are good at this kind of task. This superiority in spatial competence is represented by point 5. In the Zeptoform theory, it is called the mininization of the brain, as discussed previously. Linguistic competence is related to the left temporal lobe. Women are superior in this respect, which accounts for the second biggest statistical difference between men and women. The main reason for this difference is as follows. As discussed previously, in early life, the development of men's left brains is restrained temporarily by androgens. Consequently, women have superior linguistic competence compared to men. Because of this, girls begin to speak earlier than boys. This superiority in linguistic competence is represented by point 2, as type 2 likes conversation.
Note:
in the case of women, the linguistic center is also located in the right brain. This is represented by point 4, as illustrated. Because of this extension, women's conversations tend to include sensitive qualities of the right brain.
Practicality and sensitivity.
Point 1, point 3, and point 7 in the top left brain area represent practicality. In particular, the pragmatic quality is represented by the functioning mode of point 3. On the other hand, point 4 in the bottom right brain area represents sensitivity. As we can see, in terms of practical versus sensitive, the left brain represents male qualities, and the right brain represents female qualities. Men tend to be practical, and women tend to be sensitive.
Systemizing, and empathizing.
The top brain is related to the function of systemizing. On the other hand, the bottom brain is related to the function of empathizing. Men tend to be good at systemizing, and women tend to be good at empathizing. In other words, men tend to be good at managing systems, and women tend to be good at caring for people. According to the research by Jonathan Haidt, we can see the following relationship. Libertarians are the highest on systemizing, and the lowest on empathizing. Related to this, among libertarians, there are more men than women. Liberals are the lowest on systemizing, and the highest on empathizing. Related to this, among liberals, there are more women than men. Conservatives are in the middle on both systemizing and empathizing. When systemizing and economic liberty are compared, we can see the correlation between these two aspects. The people who tend to be good at systemizing tend to value economic liberty. The work of systemizing requires intellectuality. Related to this, according to the research by Jonathan Haidt, libertarians are the highest in IQ, and conservatives are the second. In the STEM field, which will be discussed later, you can see many libertarians. They are good at systemizing.
The Nordic gender equality paradox.
The Nordic countries are egalitarian countries. Therefore, in these countries, there is the equality of opportunity for men and women. Then, liberal social scientists predicted the following. When the equality of opportunity in society increases, the difference between men and women decreases. However, in the STEM field, exactly the opposite thing happened. The difference between men and women increased. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In this figure, the vertical axis represents the degree of gender equality for opportunities. As we can see, Nordic countries are high on gender equality for opportunities. The horizontal axis represents the percentage of women among STEM graduates. As we can see in this figure, as the degree of gender equality for opportunity increases, the number of women in the STEM field decreases. As illustrated in blue, there is no country which is high in both gender equality and female STEM graduates. The same result has been replicated by many scientists. Therefore, this finding is considered to be one of the most reliable findings in social science. The London Times, for example, stated that
it is now one of the best established findings in psychology.
The reason for the increase in difference can be explained in the following way. In egalitarian countries, people can choose what they want to choose. The freedom of choice increases. Therefore, if men and women are interested in different things, the difference between men and women will be amplified. Women tend to be interested in people, and men tend to be interested in things. This is the difference between empathizing and systemizing. Because of this difference, men tend to choose the STEM field, and women do not. However, radical liberals do not want to accept this kind of objective fact, because they want to achieve the equality of outcome. Consequently, there is the battle between political correctness versus scientific correctness, or subjective opinion versus objective fact. This political battle will be discussed in the next module.
The Big Five personality traits.
In this figure, the big 5 personality traits are listed. These are extroversion versus introversion, openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and neuroticism. First of all, we will analyze the quality of extroversion. The quality of extroversion has several aspects, such as assertiveness and warmness. These are 2 aspects of extroversion. Men tend to be high on assertiveness, and women tend to be high on warmness. The former, assertiveness, is represented by type 7, type 3, and type 1. On the other hand, the latter, warmness, is represented by type 2. They are all extroverts, and they tend to be connected to the strength of point 8. However, in the case of type 2, the aggressiveness of the type 8 quality tends to be denied. In terms of openness to experience, men tend to be open to thinking about new ideas, and women tend to be open to the experience of feelings. It is related to the difference between systemizing and empathizing. That is, systemic thinking is related to the openness to new ideas, and empathy is related to the openness to the experience of feelings. In terms of conscientiousness, men tend to have a higher score than women, especially in terms of industriousness. It is represented by type 1. In terms of agreeableness, women tend to have a higher score than men. It is represented by type 9. In terms of neuroticism, women tend to have a higher score than men. It is especially represented by type 4. In this figure, the vertical axis represents the equality of opportunity for men and women, and the horizontal axis represents the differences between men and women in personality traits, the Big Five personality traits. In gender equality countries, the differences between men and women are amplified, as illustrated. The reason is the same as the reason for the STEM field issue. The elimination of restriction, and the amplification of gender differences, are intrinsically related. As we become freer, the genetic influence also becomes freer, and thus the difference between us increases. It is called genetic amplification, as discussed in Module 1, Section 4. Consequently, for example, the number of women in the STEM field decreases, as illustrated in this figure. This figure was discussed in Module 2. The left side represents the womb realm, and the right side represents the diamond realm. In order to integrate these two realms, we need to integrate the qualities of feminine, feminine, and masculine. It is related to the solution to the hierarchy problem. The hierarchy problem was mainly discussed in Module 2. In the following two modules, we will integrate feminine, feminine, and masculine from the perspective of Zeptoform integral. As discussed in the introduction, Zeptoform integral is the integration of the Zeptoform theory and integral theory.